Warning, this video covers topics that some may find grossly disturbing and hard to hear. We won't be discussing some of the more twisted and gruesome details, but due to subject matter, some viewers may want to exit the video for the following reasons. I am not f***ing around. If you are sensitive to these topics, please leave now. I don't usually cover this type of content, but considering the amount of disturbing deep dives and video essays that I've seen about terrible crimes and the monsters that commit them, I'm surprised about the lack of awareness on this specific subject. I'm not saying those videos don't exist, but this is the story of a young boy who lost his life in such an inhumane manner, and I refuse to allow him to be forgotten or for his story to go untold. James Bulger was born on the 16th of March, 1990, in Kirkby, England. All that we can really say about James is that he was a fun-loving and happy child, as less than 3 years later, he would be kidnapped and murdered by two 10-year-old boys for reasons that we'll never truly understand. Honestly, I wish I could say so much more about him, but with the life snatched away at such a young age, we can only speculate on who he would have been. The tragedy and horrors we're going to look at today are not only meant as a cautionary tale about the atrocities people are capable of, even that of two young boys, but a story to help carry on his memory. Because the subject matter involves a child, I will be leaving out some of the details, and no, there's no photos. I have no interest in looking for any, if any even exist. This is not meant to glorify such violence, only to bring awareness to a topic I felt more people should know about. On the 12th of February 1993, in the New Strand Shopping Center in Bootle, Denise Fergus, James's mother, had James in hand while shopping at A.R. Tim's butcher shop on the lower floor of the center. At 3:40 p.m., she relinquishes James' hand to pay for her shopping. At 3:42, CCTV footage picks up Robert Thompson and John Venables, leading James by the hand out and away from the shopping center. Less than 2 minutes was all it took. Now, from everything I looked into, James's mother, Denise, was not distracted, unattentive, checked out, or uncaring. She simply released her son's hand to pay for her groceries on a seemingly normal day out, and that's all the time that it took for someone to escort her son away, and that in itself is absolutely terrifying. When Venables and Thompson were eventually caught and put on trial, both sides took a strong look at their upbringing, citing notable differences in their households, both having divorced or separated parents, but beyond that, they couldn't be more unique. Thompson from a single mother, absent father, and the fifth out of 7 siblings. His mother was painted as the stereotypical alcoholic, uncaring, and distant mother. Whereas Venables came from a divorced household, both parents sharing custody and a strong role in John's life. It wouldn't be until much later that friends and neighbors would speak out and say that John's mother was much less caring than once thought. But with this upbringing and seemingly remorseful attitude, it was no wonder that Venables was seen as the more innocent of the two. But a quick look into his history would show that he was far from it. Known for attacking classmates, disobeying authority figures, consistent truancy, as well as being the one that took James by the hand, bringing him into a false sense of security, knowing the outcome of what they planned on doing to him, would make everything feel so much more colder. As where Thompson showed almost no remorse or emotions for what he had done, to most people, he would appear to be the most mentally damaged of the two boys. But Venables, capable of violence, preemptive planning, and an outward appearance that contradicts his intentions. It's so much worse to think of how a 10-year-old may have manipulated his audience into looking like a follower or being pressured into hurting someone by a forceful peer. In the wake of the trial, this would lead to a public debate on these two boys' upbringing and what would have led to such a grisly outcome. But with such a massive void in similarities between households, it makes the question much more complicated as whether or not either family could have done something differently. That doesn't mean this should be overlooked, though. It's just much more of a difficult question to answer with so many different variables to consider. During their interviews, one of the boys would admit to planning the abduction of a child, lead them away to a busy road alongside the shopping center, and push them into the oncoming traffic. If you're already familiar with the events that took place on February 12th of 1993, you're already aware of how much more grisly and deranged the scene became as the events unfolded. The boys would take James on a 2.5-mile walk across Liverpool, where they would be seen and identified by 38 different people, only 2 of which would ever confront Venables and Thompson and question their relationship to James, in which they would either say that Venables was his older brother or that he was lost and they were taking him to the local police station. Between 5:30 p.m. and 5:45 p.m., they would wind up at an unused railway line near the former Walton and Anfield railway station in Liverpool. One of the boys threw blue paint they had shoplifted prior to the kidnapping, among other things, such as sweets as well as batteries, into James's left eye, possibly to dehumanize or add further torture to his already suffering state, leaving James to scream in agony. They stuffed shoplifted batteries into his mouth, possibly to stifle his wails of pain and discomfort. He was kicked and stomped, as well as having bricks and stones thrown at him, before being struck by a fish plate, assumably being dropped high above him. But his tormentors still weren't finished. It's worth mentioning that during James's time in his murderer's care, they would essentially parade him around. They'd walk him up busy intersections, through shops, and past multiple people who took at least a bystander's interest in the boys. These individuals would be dubbed Liverpool 38, and heavily scrutinized for their lack of action. Leading up to James's murder, people would witness them punching or even kicking James, as well as playing with him and making him laugh and cry. This led some people to question what their intentions were if they were willing to drag James along in front of so many witnesses for as long as they did. It gave this perception that they may have had the intentions of returning him or abandoning him at any point in time. But for right now, I want you to keep this in the back of your mind as we move on. During the trial, public outrage was at an all-time high. One boy who was brought in for questioning under suspicion of involvement was forced to flee the area due to threats of vigilantes. Liverpool 38 were demonized by the media for their lack of interference, despite some recalling James acting happy and playful, and others recollecting a boy who was scared, hurt, and crying. One instance was of a witness who watched as Venables punched James and shook him violently before closing their curtains to avoid the sight. This and other instances would lead the public to seeing some form of justice for James. Although the public already had their recourse in mind, some, higher up, believed that this could be the work of two young boys, unaware of the atrocity they had committed and what that meant for everyone else. The same people who believed that no one willing to drag their captor in front of so many witnesses could have been solely intended on ending his life. Some even believed that children as young as 10 weren't capable of understanding right from wrong, or at least what they had done would have had such grave implications. Others, needing someone to blame, would turn to the parents with threats upon their lives. James' attack and death took place between 5:45 and 6 p.m. Within that time, he sustained 42 injuries, 22 to his face and head alone, after which Venables and Thompson would spread the toddler's body over railway tracks and bury his head with various rocks, stones, and other rubble to make what followed look as though it was an accident. The pathologist was unable to determine what blow officially ended James' life, only that he had passed away some time before the train had hit him. Thompson was portrayed as the ringleader and Venables the willing participant, and although that may not mirror the harsh reality, it doesn't really matter. In the end, a life was snuffed out. An extremely young boy with his entire life ahead of him, leaving behind only his parents to mourn and the entire country in an uproar about the outcome of the legal proceedings. Now from here, for my American viewers, this may get a bit confusing as the UK's legal system is very different from the US, but I'll do my best to clarify and follow up near the end. Thompson and Venables, dubbed Boy A and Boy B respectively, to hide their identities, were tried in adult court, which was heavily scrutinized by the European Court of Human Rights, that believed the boys weren't given a fair and just trial due to their age, Britain still remaining a part of the European Union at this point. It seems both Venables and Thompson initially pleaded their innocence, but somewhere down the line would point the finger at each other, and beginning on the 1st of November 1993 and ending on the 24th, both Thompson and Venables would be found guilty, becoming the youngest convicted murderers of the 20th century. The judge over the proceedings, Mr. Justice Moreland, would recommend a minimum term of 8 years, meaning they would be eligible for release by the time that they were both 18. He would also lift the reporting restrictions, essentially allowing the defendants' names to be released to the public. The sentencing was heavily scrutinized, not only by the public that felt that this wasn't justice for James, but on the other hand, notable political figures felt very differently. Editors of The Sun, a British tabloid, would hand over a petition with nearly 280,000 signatures to the Home Secretary at the time, Michael Howard, which would greatly increase the minimum serving sentence for Thompson and Venables, at least up to 15 years altogether. A very small win, but a win nonetheless. Lord Donaldson, a British barrister, would respond to Howard's intervention, calling it institutionalized vengeance, essentially deeming it overkill, and the ruling would eventually be overturned by the House of Lords that would rule it unlawful for the Home Secretary to decide on sentencing for young offenders. Hopefully, at this point, you understand the outrage of a country that didn't see extended sentencing as vengeance for what Thompson and Venables had done. This was just the tip of the iceberg for someone who the public deemed unworthy of any sort of rehabilitation. Why should two murderers, albeit children, be allowed to take the life of another and given the chance to correct their ways and continue on with theirs? But unfortunately, we're not done yet. This may be difficult for some Americans to wrap their heads around. As an example, in the case of Tristan Bailey, a 13-year-old murdered by her classmate, 14-year-old Aiden Fucci, he was tried as an adult and given a life sentence in prison with the possibility of parole after a minimum of 25 years served. Others have been given life sentences without the possibility of parole. Before 2005, the death penalty was still considered constitutional to minors in the U.S. This may seem extremely barbaric, but it shows the clear contrast of what 8 years could be to two young offenders who drug a toddler 2.5 miles across the city to murder him. All of this was being upheld by political figures in a position of power who would take sympathy on two young boys who they themselves may not deem worthy of being culpable for their own actions. The worst was yet to come, though, as upon release in 2001, at the age of 18, they would both be given new identities, reportedly costing nearly £1.5 million, nearly $2 million, or nearly $4.5 million adjusted for inflation from 1993. Not only were they allowed to commit such a heinous act against someone so small and incapable of defending himself, they were allowed to lead normal lives after their release at 18, and all under the protection of the government. This feels like an insult. The question should have never been whether or not these two could be rehabilitated. The question always should have been whether or not they deserved it. But the question has always persisted of whether or not a 10-year-old was capable of understanding right from wrong. I don't think it's that simple, though. Whether they understand what this meant, or how a small child would lose his life, leaving so much heartbreak, you also have to consider whether or not you can expect a 10-year-old to care about such a drastic decision. Every step along their journey was a moment in preparation for doing serious bodily harm to this child, as though he was an insect or a wild animal to torment. From a plan to push a small child into heavy traffic, dropping him on his head near the beginning of their journey, to joking about letting him fall into a canal and drown. Every moment was an opportunity to express some level of humanity. When they would play games with him and make him laugh, or they would hit him or bully him and make him cry. Any moment could have changed the course of what they inevitably decided to do. This wasn't a last-minute decision or one made in panic. They planned to snatch someone much younger, incapable of fighting back or having the faintest understanding of what was happening. With so many opportunities for James to elicit help from the number of times he would cry for his mother, it leads so many people to question why he would stop when in the presence of someone that could save him. He trusted them, and that's what I believe makes them so calculated. So far, many have tried to unearth the identities of Venables and Thompson, and have been penalized for not only putting Venables and Thompson's lives at risk by vigilantes seeking revenge for what happened to James, but also for jeopardizing the new costly identities the government would spend so much money to protect. It should be noted that this is not something to be taken lightly either. Many really do want to see justice for James, and many, even now, over 30 years later, have attempted to expose their new identities. The implication is incredibly dangerous as well. The possibility of wrongly accusing someone could be a death sentence for them, and even possible, if proven innocent, could still risk ruining the rest of their lives from people who want to believe and still want someone to blame and harass. I would never recommend putting anyone else's life at risk. So far, since Thompson's release, he's been completely silent. Those higher up have assured the public that he has not reoffended, although it's equally possible he's gotten better at hiding it. Venables, on the other hand, has reoffended on a few occasions, with use of cocaine, street fights, and returning to Merseyside where the crime occurred. But in 2010, he was caught with over 50 explicit child abuse images. He would later be released to the public once again in 2013, and finally in 2017 he was caught with explicit child abuse photos once again. He admitted to being in possession of 392 Category A, 148 Category B, and 630 Category C child abuse images, as well as a quote-unquote pedophile manual. He is still behind bars to this day,
his most recent hearing in 2023 to be released was denied. I remember first reading about this when I was 16. It hurt then just as it does now. James would be 2 years older than me and quite possibly living the same life, starting a family, diving headfirst into a career. When I decided to write this, I thought a lot about how James would look at this as if he was still around. He quite possibly could have been a friend, a neighbor, a coworker. He could have been me. I also thought about my son when I wrote this. He isn't much older than James was, and I could only imagine how Denise and Ralph, James' parents, would feel hearing this, reliving it. I can't say that this does much good, but I hope I can light a fire in your heart and push you to make a change. Let it be a cautionary tale of what some of us are capable of. But most of all, let it be the tale of a young boy who lost his life before it truly began. Remember his name and carry it on further. I don't know who's going to see this, or who will even make it this far, but I'm going to leave a link to a foundation called For James, the James Bulger Memorial Trust, and if you want, you could donate to help families in similar situations or families in need. And it's also a fantastic way to show just how loved and cared for James still is after all these years. Anyways, thank you guys for watching the video. My patrons will be on the screen. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and share it with someone who needs to know about this. But until next time, be safe.